The glass atrium hummed with applause as Nathaniel Cross raised a champagne flute and, smiling for the cameras, thanked the city for inspiring him to build a better world. Elena, 8 months pregnant under a silk gown she barely recognized as hers, stood beside him like a borrowed ornament. Then he did it. He slid his arm from her waist, gestured toward a raven-haired publicist in a backless dress, and said into the microphone, "And to Sloan Hart, who actually made tonight possible." Laughter. Flashes. Silence. Elena's vision fizzed at the edges. When Nathan's fingers clamped her wrist and she swayed, security crossed the floor. Fast. The Gala at the glass house floated above the Hudson like a crystal ship. Manhattan winked through the windows, and reflected city lights braided themselves through Elena's abdomen, where their sun shifted and pressed a heel against her ribs. She inhaled through her nose, exhaled through parted lips. Priya's breathing trick. Don't lock your knees. Nathan was incandescent in that way he always was under lights, a born orator, the self-made investor who'd bet early on a wireless battery startup and doubled his net worth before turning 35. The paper called him relentless. Elena knew another word that fit. Practiced. Every gesture measured, every pause rehearsed. "And to Sloan Hart," he said, tipping his glass toward the woman with winged eyeliner and a ringing laugh, whose PR genius opened doors and hearts. He didn't look at Eleanor. He didn't have to. She felt his message in her bones. Behave. Sloan smiled with the fatigue of someone who liked winners and had learned how to brace against fallout. The cameras pivoted. A donor with a sapphire the size of a sunspot clapped too eagerly. Elena's cheeks burned. She felt the gown's empire waist pinch, the hidden corsetry insisting on a silhouette the baby refused to grant. When she tried to step away from the podium, Nathan's hand caught her wrist. Not hard, tight, controlling. "Stay," he murmured without moving his lips, the smile still painted in place for the front row. "Don't make me look like a fool." Something in her posture changed. Years of "don't embarrass me" at dinners and board retreats sluiced through her. The adjectives he preferred, polished, exquisite, supportive, clanked against the truth. She wasn't a vase on his mantle. She was a person who had spent that morning reading to a child who hadn't opened his eyes yet. "Let go," she said softly. She angled her arm down to break his grip, the way Victor, the head of security, had taught Gala volunteers during a training about crowd spills and elbowing paparazzi. He wasn't watching for her, but he was watching everything else. Nathan blinked, and the smile sharpened. "Don't do this!" he hissed, teeth together. Sloan had drifted closer, a comet slipping into orbit. Her perfume, green fig and clean musk, skated over Elena's throat. "Maybe she needs air," Sloan said brightly, to no one and everyone. "It's warm up here." Eleanor eased a step back, already planning to angle toward the terrace doors and the slice of night beyond them. Then the baby rolled, the world tilted, and Eleanor's heel caught the lip of the riser. Her hand flew out. Nathan reached. Their contact failed. Victor moved. Bulk in a fitted suit, earpiece curling like a question mark, he covered the distance in a clean line, one hand up to signal his team, the other extended toward Eleanor. The glass atrium turned into a cathedral of intake breaths. "Mrs. Cross," he said calmly, bracing her elbow. "We're going to step out for a moment." Nathan straightened, fury flashing through the cracks in his presentation. "She's fine," he said, too loud. "She'll be fine if she stops being dramatic." That word. Dramatic. As if pregnancy were a performance she inflicted on him. The crowd's attention shifted, the way crowds do, collective empathy looking for a safe exit. The board chair, a woman named Constance Green, who wore dignity like a scar and a brooch of hammered gold, stepped forward with the ghost of a smile and the teeth of a trap. "Mr. Cross," she said, "please let our team assist your wife." For half a second, Nathan didn't move. The cameras caught the tableau. Wife recovering her balance, mistress hovering, husband calculating the optics of yielding. Then the calculation broke on his face, and he snapped. "You don't get to tell me how to handle my family." Victor had already made the decision. He slid bodily between Nathan and Eleanor and angled his shoulder so subtle it looked like a dance. "Sir," he said, soft steel, "I'll need you to give us space." Cameras clicked with appetite. One of Victor's team murmured into his sleeve, and 2 additional guards appeared on either side of Nathan, as if conjured by a stage direction. "This is my event," Nathan said. "My money built this night." Constance's smile warmed by a single degree. "That's not how charity works." Minutes later, fewer than it takes to refill a flute or draft a tweet, security stepped in again, this time with Constance at their flank and a neatly folded piece of paper. "Mr. Cross," Victor said, voice pitched to travel no further than Nathan's collar. "The Foundation Board is requesting you step off the stage and join them in the green room." In the murmur that followed, it was easy to miss the way Sloane's hand tightened around her clutch, or the flicker in her eyes that looked like pity or triumph, or both. Before Elena Marquez became Elena Cross, she restored paintings for a living. Not museum masterpieces, at least not at first. She cleaned cigarette film from the bright arcs of mid-century oils that had hung in the apartments of women who married bold men and divorced them gently. She patched canvas with patience and matched colors that had aged beneath varnish into secrets. She met Nathan at a donor breakfast for the Metropolitan Arts Foundation 2 summers ago, when humidity hugged the city and the eggs were cooked as if they, too, were rich. He was giving money for a youth apprenticeship program. She was presenting on conservation techniques for contemporary murals vandalized with tags. He approached after the talk. "You made an invisible craft visible," he said, watching her as if she were a market trend he intended to ride. He sent flowers to the studio, peonies stuffed in tissue-like promises. He learned her coffee order. He asked questions that showed he had read the article about her immigrant mother, Mariella, a housekeeper who saved for night classes and finally opened a bodega that squeaked by. He looked, really looked, when Eleanor spoke about the first time she'd touched paint that had lived longer than any of her relatives. The first red flag wore white silk. At a rooftop dinner with venture capitalists and their spouses, she laughed too loudly at a joke she didn't understand. Later, with his palm gentle on the small of her back, he said, "I love how expressive you are. Maybe practice the jokes before the next one." It wasn't a command, not exactly. The second flag was a request masked as care. "I set up a driver for you, just in case. The city's unpredictable." The third was a password. "Share your location with me. It calms me down." She did at first, because Elena understood fear. Her father had been soft and temporary. Her mother, all edges and persistence. She knew the glue that held people together often dried unevenly. When Nathan proposed on a Sunday morning, barefoot, coffee cooling, knee on the rug she'd bought for the studio, she said yes through tears, thinking, maybe control is another form of love, a rough translation that will smooth in time. The prenup read like a spreadsheet, which made sense because it had been one. She skimmed and signed because she wanted a home with a bathtub deep enough to float in, and a nursery with a window large enough for the moon to visit. She was not naive, she was hopeful, which, in the language of watchful women, is sometimes the same thing. When she found out she was pregnant, Nathan cried. She watched relief and terror take turns on his face. "No one did this right for me," he said, his voice a raw place. "My father left during a snowstorm when I was 9. I'll be different. He built schedules. He attended checkups. He redesigned the nursery 3 times. He liked rules. He did not like deviation. If Eleanor's cravings leaned toward greasy tacos from the walk-up on 10th Avenue, he suggested quinoa bowls with broiled salmon. If she worked late at the studio, he sent a car and then called the driver. If she balked at a gala 2 months before her due date, he said the quiet part out loud. This is good for us. There were also kindnesses. He sat on the cold tile when nausea dragged her into the bathroom and held her hair. He bought a rocking chair that seemed to breathe under her. He learned to say, "Our son," with a softness that was almost reverent. When he grew distracted in the spring and began answering texts with one-word dispatches from other rooms, she told herself it was the acquisition, or the lawsuit, or the new PR firm. When she met Sloan Hart at a product launch, Sloan in a white suit cut like a blade, red mouth like a dare, Elena recognized a different kind of warning, the one that wears competence like perfume and looks straight through your ribcage before smiling. Your work is gorgeous, Sloan said smoothly, and Elena surprised herself by liking her. Some women arrive as storms you want to stand in. The 4th red flag didn't wave. It pressed. Elena found a lipstick in the glove compartment of the driver's BMW. Not red. A precise neutral called almost. She returned it to the compartment and moved her body around the knowledge like it was furniture in the dark. By June, nursery hung with paper moons, bassinet smelling faintly of cedar. Elena learned to count the seconds between Nathan's answers and to measure the weight of a lie between his teeth. She learned that a power imbalance can look like a partnership until the light changes. She learned that love can be a bridge crossed by 2 different maps. Sloan Hart grew up in a house with a door that stuck in winter and an older brother who believed in improbable machines. Her mother had taught her to iron inside out and to expect little. Her father had taught her that the loudest men often needed the room quiet to hear themselves. Sloan did not worship money. She admired what it did to fear. PR was the wrong name for what she did. She didn't spin. She diagnosed stories that would tell themselves, with or without her, and then decided where they would land. She had kept artists from collapsing under the weight of their own myth, and she had watched CEOs like Nathan buy new myths from catalogs and try them on in front of other men. Nathan approached her after a panel about reputation as risk. He shook her hand too long and said, "We're moving from venture to climate infrastructure. We need someone who understands narrative." Sloan understood a dozen things in that moment, most of them invisible on paper. Thing 1, he was hungry. Thing 2, he respected women the way certain kings had respected the queens who poisoned them slowly. He acknowledged their power and hired tasters. Thing 3, his eyes had flicked, once, toward Elena in the back row. Softness, plus intellect, plus a body arranged around a child. Beloved, maybe, but not immune from his calculations. Sloan had her own reasons. 2 years earlier, Nathan had quietly backed out of a verbal agreement to fund her brother David's energy startup after due diligence turned up what Nathan called unfortunate incompetence and what Sloan called honest learning at scale. The retraction had soured other term sheets. David's company folded. He tried again. He failed again. He moved to Montreal and stopped answering calls. Sloan could bear most things, but not the way shame eats language. So when Nathan asked her to take him on, she said yes. She steered him through interviews and honed his phrases. She introduced him to Constance from the foundation, knowing Constance evaluated men like sculpture, weight, center of gravity, cracks disguised with lacquer. She learned the rhythms of Nathan's compromises, tenacity gilded with philanthropy, demands perfumed with ask, Then she learned the half-step too far. Texts at 2 a.m. that began with strategy and slid toward confession. He sent a photo of his hand on a white crib rail and wrote, "I don't know how to be human about this much responsibility." It would have been moving if, a day later, he hadn't also sent a careless joke about Elena's appetite for pickles that glinted with contempt. Sloan didn't plan to be his mistress. The word itself was a museum artifact, displayed under glass, smelling faintly of dust and roses. But one late night in his office, a pour of Japanese whiskey, a thunderstorm expansion over the river, she found him shivering under his armor. She told herself she was collecting data. She told herself her brother would feel avenged if she learned exactly why Nathan broke his promise. She told herself 100 things. Most of them were not true. After, she stared at the ceiling and thought, "You're better at manipulating stories than people." The difference mattered. She was not a cartoon. She tipped baristas. She called her mother. She sent money to David most months, whether he replied or not. She stared at Elena during the product launch and thought, there is no version of this that ends without shrapnel. The evening of the gala, Sloan arrived with a plan that had, in its gentlest form, a public apology embedded in it. Nathan would praise Elena. Elena would glow. He would glow by proxy. The foundation would get its check, and everyone could leave believing themselves kind. It could have been tidy, but men like Nathan often refuse tidy when spectacle is an option. He'd sent Sloan a note before the event. Board wants a story. Might push the envelope. She had responded, push the donation, not your wife. He'd sent back a thumbs up without punctuation, a child's promise. When he grabbed Elena's wrist, Sloan's throat thrummed with panic, guilt, fury that wasn't entirely for Elena, and a body memory of men who had once squeezed any softer woman into silhouettes of themselves. She said, maybe she needs air, hoping Nathan would hear the choreography of rescue. He missed the beat. Security didn't. Victor, whom Sloan had always respected because he looked at women's faces, not their chests, and at men's hands, not their watches, moved. When Constance's team arrived with a folded paper, policy, censure, Sloan felt the first tremor in a larger collapse. You're not the fulcrum, she told herself, as if absolution could be instructed into being. You're just the witness who forgot to stay outside the frame. The green room smelled like lilacs and new carpet. Constance's brooch winked in the lamplight like an oath. Elena sat on a velvet ottoman, shoes off, ankles swollen, nausea receding under a paper cup of water. Priya had texted from the hospital, call me if the contractions change. They're Braxton Hicks, Constance said gently, half asking. Elena nodded. Practice, she said, feeling both inside and outside the word. I'm okay. Victor stood near the door, a silent hinge. Outside, the murmurs of donors adjusted themselves to new narratives. Inside, Constance unfolded the paper. Mr. Cross, she said, when Nathan entered. This is the Foundation's Code of Conduct reminder and a request for a separate conversation about optics and safety. You called security on me, Nathan said, disbelieving, like the world had tilted in a way that violated physics. He glanced at Victor. You know who I am. Victor's expression didn't change. I know who she is, he said, tilting his head toward Elena. Constance cleared her throat. We're grateful for your support. We're not hostage to it. Sloan hovered awkwardly at the threshold, until Elena met her eyes, and gave a small nod that could have meant, come in, stay out. I see you. Sloan stepped in, softer than usual. Elena, she said, abjuring, Mrs. Cross, like a prayer she wouldn't say. Can I get you space? Elena said, not unkindly. Please, Nathan's fury softened not into apology, but into a negotiation. "We're all a little keyed up," he said. I should return to the room. The donation— Constance's smile hardened. "The board chair will announce that the Cross family's contribution will proceed as planned, contingent on clarity around some recent questions." She looked at Sloan. "Ms. Hart, the draft press release you sent this afternoon includes a paragraph we'll be revising. Vision requires discipline, reads differently after a public scolding." Sloan swallowed. She had written that line while thinking of money and machines, not of Elena's face. "I'll adjust," she said. Nathan bristled. "What recent questions?" A polite knock. Another board member slipped in and murmured to Constance. Constance's brows lifted, and she took a slow breath that added 6 seconds to the room's oxygen. "Mr. Cross, security will escort you downstairs for a moment. There are official visitors who would like a word regarding a preliminary inquiry." Nathan laughed, once, sharp, hearing his own PR training. Deflect, diminish. "Here, during a fundraiser." "Bad timing rarely asks permission," Constance said. She nodded to Victor. "Wait," Elena said, surprising herself. 3 faces turned. "I don't want a scene." Victor's voice gentled. "Sometimes the absence of a scene is the quiet one that comes after." Sloane's hand whitened around her clutch. She had fed one of those official visitors a breadcrumb months ago, an email that suggested a deal structured in a way regulators found offensive. She hadn't expected the breadcrumb to sprout legs tonight. She felt nauseous and wished, with the helplessness of late realizations, that she had stepped twice more to the side of the frame. Nathan stared at Elena, willing her to rescue him from the rules of the world. "Lena," he said, using the nickname reserved for mornings and whispers. "Tell them to wait," she shook her head. No malice, just the mercy of truth. "I can't." Victor's team flanked Nathan, not touching, but suggesting lines on the floor. Nathan looked briefly very young, as if the tux had grown around a boy who hadn't earned it. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice had lost its teeth. He followed. After the door closed, no one spoke. The noise of the gala seeped through the wall, a party still in progress, the city doing what it always does, continuing. Sloan sat across from Elena, like a defendant, begging for a trial date. "I'm sorry," she said. "You didn't ask for any of this." Elena studied her. "Why did you come into our life?" she asked. Not accusing, just seeking. Sloan started to say something clever, and instead told the truth. "Because your husband breaks things and calls it strategy. Because I thought I could calibrate him. Because I wanted something from him that didn't belong to him." Elena's smile was skeptical and tired, and, impossibly, kind. "And did you?" Sloane's lashes dipped. "I don't know yet." Constance cleared her throat. "Ms. Hart, I won't tell you what to do, but when women participate in their own diminishment, the invoice arrives with both their names." Sloan nodded, something inside her shifting. "Understood." Elena sipped water. The baby hiccuped, little wings tapping. She put her palm to her belly and felt, for the first time that night, a thread pulleyed from panic to purpose. "I'm going home," she said to the room, but mostly to herself. "I need quiet." "I'll walk you out," Victor said. Sloan stood helpless with her clutch. "Do you want me to—" "No," Elena said. "I want you to stop." The request was a mirror. Sloan looked into it and saw an outline she could choose not to fill. They crossed the terrace into a night that smelled like river and rain. The city exhaled fog. Cabs moved in amber chains. Victor fell into step with Elena, keeping half a pace back, a presence that said safety without insisting. "Thank you," Elena said after a block, shoes dangling from her hand, feet cooled by the cold seam of the granite. "For intervening," Victor shrugged one shoulder. crowd management, peripheral vision. Seeing it before it becomes a story you can't undo. He glanced at her belly. "How are you?" "Practicing," she said, and he smiled. At the curb, a black car idled. Victor opened the door and then, unexpectedly, crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "I don't know what happens tomorrow," he said, "but I know the part where you get to decide what story you tell your child about tonight." Elena nodded. She took the card he offered almost absently. Victor O'Rourke, Security Director. On the back, a handwritten number. She tucked it into her clutch and felt, briefly, like someone had slipped a talisman into her pocket. Her phone buzzed in her lap as the car pulled away. A string of messages from Nathan, stacked under the last unread. "They're making a mistake. Don't do this. We can fix it together. Then, I need you at my side." Then, devastatingly, "I'm scared." Elena built a small nest of silence around herself. She texted Priya, "Home, feet up, Braxton Hicks, baby okay." Priya replied with a string of hearts and a note, "Proud of you. Call if anything changes. Hydrate." The apartment smelled like lemon oil, and the nursery like new wood. Elena leaned in the doorway and watched the moon throw a coin of light on the rocking chair. She stepped in and traced the rail with her fingertip. She tried to remember a moment earlier in the night when she could have chosen differently and found none that didn't require borrowing someone else's spine. Her mother arrived 20 minutes later, hair still pinned from her shift, eyes bright with combustible worry. "Mi amor," Mariella said, gathering Elena gently so the baby wasn't squashed. "I saw the clip. Everyone sees everything." Elena's laugh broke. "That's the problem." Mariella's hands were small and miraculous. They had cleaned offices that smelled like other people's success and counted till drawers that never quite balanced. "I wanted you to marry a good man," she said simply. "But I wanted more for you. A good life. Sometimes they're not the same." They sat on the floor of the nursery, back against the crib, and talked like they had in the bodega when Elena was 12 and terrified by pre-algebra. They built a tower of words and climbed it. In the morning, the story had multiplied into many stories. Think pieces about public humiliation, threads about power, a leaked photo of Sloan watching the scene with a face folded between empathy and something else. A short item in a financial blog mentioned that representatives from a regulatory agency had requested documents from Nathan's firm regarding a green bond offering that looked unusual. The headline called it a routine inquiry. People in suits know how to drape the word routine over the word fire. Nathan's lawyer called. Then Nathan called. Then silence. Then a single text. "I'm checking into the Mercer. Need space for legal." She stared at the words until their edges blurred, and then wrote back, "I need space for me." Victor texted that afternoon, "If you need a quiet walk, I know where to find one." She didn't respond for an hour, then sent, "Where?" He replied with a pin 30 blocks north, a sliver of Riverside Park under a bridge where the city's noise braided itself into music. They met at dusk. Victor's suit had become a jacket. He carried 2 warm paper cups. "Hot chocolate," he said. "Priya's orders indirectly." The breeze lifted the hair from Elena's neck. "I don't want to be the woman people pity," Elena said, when words arrived. "Or the woman they admire for leaving. Or the woman who stays and is secretly a saint. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a person who is having a day." Victor drank. "That's allowed." They walked. He didn't ask questions that ensured confessions. He told a story about a gala years ago where a pop star stopped a set to tie a waitress's shoe. He said, "I like the moments when power remembers it's supposed to serve. They watched the river rewrite itself. Back home, Elena read an email from Constance. Subject: The Wing. Body: We'll honor the Cross family donation with a revised credit. Marquez Family Neonatal Art Program. Your mother's name deserves a wall. Ignore the bored chatter about precedent. They'll live. Sleep if you can. See, Eleanor cried quietly into a dish towel, because dignity and relief often share a zipper. She thought of the wing that would now carry her mother's work ethic into rooms where women breathed babies into the world, and decided, not for the first time, to survive. Nathan Cross discovered very quickly that the invisible shield around powerful men is mostly composed of people's desire to be close to warmth. Remove the heat source, and the shield thins. His lawyer spoke in pages. It's a preliminary request, Nathan. They want to understand the structure of the Greenwood bond. Nathan heard specific words only in relation to threat: disclosure, convertible, market-making, beneficial ownership. He wanted to call it a nothing burger and hear Sloan chuckle and help him rename it something edible. Sloan didn't chuckle. She sent a careful message. We should pause public appearances. Draft apology. Lead with concern for Elena and the baby. Don't litigate feelings in public. He read it as betrayal. If she had slept in his bed, shouldn't she be on his side of every line? He didn't accommodate the answer. A person can share a pillow and still hold a mirror. When he called, she didn't pick up. She sat in her apartment and watched the phone tremble across the table. Her brother texted for the first time in months. Saw the clip. You okay? She stared at you okay? Until the words broke into letters. You. Okay. The grace of concern from a person you had failed to save felt like a debt forgiven, and a debt incurred at once. She typed, I made a career out of rearranging harm. Harder when you're the harm. He sent back a link to a recipe for arroz con leche and a dumb joke about overcooking rice. She laughed and then cried, and then did both together, because the body seldom wants one without the other. The inquiry widened. Asher Duvall, Nathan's COO, a man who wore competence like a grey sweater, advised transparency. You'll want to be ahead of this, Asher said, eyes bandaged with fatigue. The Greenwood bond side letter reads like a confession. It reads like a good deal, Nathan snapped. They get liquidity. We get a seat at the table. The planet gets infrastructure. You get leverage, Asher said. The word echoed in the green room and in Eleanor's pulse. Nathan's anger slashed indiscriminately, carving guilt into everyone within reach. He told the story of the Gala to a group of men who needed to believe he'd been provoked. He told another version on the phone to his father, the absent snowstorm himself, whose advice was a chorus of clichés about standing tall and knowing who you are. He told yet a third to his reflection. I am not the villain. But at 3 a.m., a different truth arrived like a tired friend. He had humiliated Eleanor to make Sloan and the donors see his control. He had grabbed a wrist that belonged to someone who was building a person out of cells and courage. He had told himself this was leadership. He had lied. The next day, Nathan showed up at Elena's door with the face of a man who had rehearsed 6 apologies and liked none of them. Mariella answered with her sleeves rolled. She didn't move from the doorway. She's resting, she said. You can send a letter. I'll place it where she can pick it up or not. I need to see my wife, Nathan said. This is ridiculous. This is rest, Mariella said. Ridiculous is a grown man thinking a gala is a stage for correction. She looked at his collarbone, the neat notch where a tie would tuck in. My daughter grew up stocking shelves and memorizing multiplication tables at the register because we couldn't afford a tutor. You grew up believing you could buy grace in bulk. She lifted her eyebrows. We're out of stock." Nathan closed his eyes. When he opened them, he said something he hadn't practiced. "I'm sorry." Mariella tipped her head, listening for intention. "Write it down," she said, and shut the door. He sat on the lobby bench and wrote. He wrote about fear and love and control disguised as care. He wrote about the boy in the snowstorm and the man who mistook applause for approval. He wrote the sentence that hurt him to ink. "I chose my pride over your dignity, in a room full of people, and I can't choose that again, and keep the right to stand in this home." He folded the letter and imagined it being read, or not, and felt the truth and powerlessness of consequence. Upstairs, Eleanor ate toast under a blanket and watched the baby build small houses out of kicks. She read the letter 4 times. Then she placed it in the drawer with the little socks shaped like rabbits. Sloan showed up too, 2 days later, dressed in mercy instead of armor. She didn't ask to come in. She met Elena in the lobby, where the concierge pretended to not have an opinion. "I'm resigning," Sloan said without preamble. "From Nathan's firm and from the position I created for myself without asking permission." Her smile was almost self-destruction, almost self-rescue. "I'm good at crisis. I don't want to be the reason for one." Elena exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and suspicion. "Why tell me?" "Because I made you part of a story you didn't consent to," Sloan said. "I wanted you to hear, from me, that I'm stepping out of the frame. Also," she hesitated, "there's a folder with receipts, not about us, about Greenwood. You should know the scope of what's in motion." Elena didn't take the folder. "Give it to Constance," she said. "Or Asher, or the people who knock on doors with paper." Sloan nodded. "I will." They stood awkwardly until Elena said, surprising herself, "You could have been my friend in another life." "In most lives, I hope I am," Sloan said. She walked away lighter and lonelier, and more honest than she had been in years. Weeks slid by, the baby measuring time in hiccups and rolls, the city measuring time in headlines. Nathan stepped down from his firm, pending resolution. Asher took the helm with a press release about stewardship and trust that managed with surgical precision, not to mention Nathan's name. Therapy began because Elena said, on the phone, "If you ever want to be in the same room as your son, without me counting the exits, you'll work on what you do when you're scared." Nathan found a woman with iron-gray hair who listened for an hour and then said, "You manipulate love to feel safe. It doesn't work. Let's find something else." He hated her and returned the next week and the week after. He apologized again, in person this time, with Mariella at the end of the sofa like a notary. Eleanor didn't absolve him. She didn't punish him either. She said, "You can come to appointments. You can bring soup. You can read about trauma. You can do what you say you'll do, and then keep doing it when I'm tired of noticing." He did. Slowly. Imperfectly. He flinched at articles that called him names he deserved. He stood in the neonatal ward of the hospital with Constance and signed a revised endowment agreement that replaced Cross with Marquez, and didn't itch when his mother called to ask why their name was missing from the wall. He learned to text Elena before showing up. He learned to wash bottles without commentary. He learned to say, "I'm spiraling," instead of snapping, "You're overreacting." He made mistakes and said so. He said it in the presence of witnesses, because accountability in private is a whisper, and in public it's a vow. Victor stayed in the periphery like a good boundary. He recommended a locksmith when Elena wanted new deadbolts. He sent a playlist titled "Breath Like a Bridge" for nights when sleep refused her. He did not flirt. That would have been a trespass. Once, when she asked about his life, he said, "My wife left 5 years ago. We're kind now." Life insisted. Sloan took a job at a non-profit incubator that paid less and aligned more. She called David once a week and said, "We're both learning how to walk without talking ourselves out of it." She dated a woman who asked her exactly what she wanted and listened to the answer. She learned that desire is different when you're not pretending to be a cure. When labor began, a drifting ache that organized into intention, Elena texted Priya, then Mariella, then, after a long breath, Nathan. He arrived with a bag he had packed and repacked again, and a face that looked like a man holding the edge of something holy. In the delivery room, he didn't direct. He asked what she needed, and then did that. He drew the curtain when nurses came and sat when her body asked for quiet. When the baby arrived, slick with work and immense with being, Nathan cried the kind of tears that rinse a face different. They named him Matteo, after Mariella's father, who had crossed a border with a pocketful of songs. Later, when Elena dozed and Matteo made newborn noises, like paper crinkling, Nathan whispered to his son about bridges he would build with his hands, not his money. He promised to be small in the face of wonder and large in the face of threat. He promised to never use another person as a mirror. When Elena woke, he told her, "I want to be the man who makes your life easier, not narrower." "Then be him," she said, not unkindly. "Don't describe him to me." He nodded. Words had been his favorite currency. He was learning new economies. Autumn pressed the city into vividness. The neonatal art program opened with a wall of color. Children's drawings of rivers and bridges and hands. The plaque read, "Marquez Family Neonatal Arts Program," and beneath it, smaller, "Founded in honor of mothers who built worlds with 2 hands." Elena walked the corridor with Matteo against her chest and felt the peculiar way happiness and melancholy braid, a life that contains both, and a woman who does too. She had not decided what, precisely, she wanted her marriage to be next. She wasn't waiting for a cinematic reconciliation. She was waiting for evidence. In the meantime, there was a baby to bathe, and a mother to tease, and a friend's text to answer. There was a life. Nathan arrived with a bouquet he had chosen himself, eucalyptus and yellow ranunculus that smelled like sunlight. He kept a respectful distance that didn't feel like exile. "I've been volunteering here," he said quietly. "Stocking supplies. I'm not good at it yet. The labels judge me." She smiled despite herself. "Good. Make them your teachers." She adjusted Matteo's cap. "Do you want to hold him?" He did. He looked at Elena as if she were a coastline he could approach without conquest. "I'm not asking for a verdict," he said. "I'm asking for time to become consistent." "You have that," she said, "and boundaries." He nodded, cradling Matteo's fierce smallness. "I can live with fences if they keep gardens." They left the wing and walked into a day that had organized itself around possibility. Sloan arrived late, breathless, clutching a stuffed giraffe she'd bought from the hospital shop, because penance, for once, wanted plush. She hugged Elena quickly, respectfully, and then stepped back. "No more frames," she said. Half joke, whole promise. "Only windows," Elena said, and they both laughed at metaphors that had learned to be furniture they could move around and sit on. Victor passed in the hall, tipped his chin, kept going. "Some men are ballast. They don't ask to be sail." Outside, the city performed its daily miracle. It went on. Children tugged at their mothers' coats. A bus inhaled and exhaled its cargo. Somewhere, a donor rehearsed a speech. Somewhere else, a woman was saying, "Let go," and being heard. Under it, through it, Eleanor felt something like faith, but narrower, more personal. Not faith in people to be better than they are. Faith in herself to choose when to open the door and when to walk away from it. Baby pressed to chest. Heart practiced at a new rhythm. Redemption, she decided, wasn't a single actor, but a pile of small ones, stacked and restacked, sometimes knocking over at 3 a.m. when colic sang and sleep was a myth. Love wasn't forgiveness on demand. It was the decision to keep the light on in the kitchen while someone learned how to arrive on time, and to turn it off when they didn't, and to sleep anyway without hating the dark. On the way home, she paused on the bridge where she and Victor had once listened to the river. She didn't text him. Some kindnesses don't ask for encore bows. She said aloud to the water, to the city that turned every hurt into story, and every story into rumor, and some rumors into mercy. We're good. A gull sliced the air. Matteo sneezed, offended by the world's dust, then sighed like a king satisfied with his kingdom. Elena pressed her lips to his temple. We're good, she said again, and this time the word sat in her mouth like bread. If this story made your pulse quicken in the atrium, if you tasted the electric silence when a hand gripped a wrist and the room chose sides, if you felt the small weight of Matteo's head and the larger weight of boundaries finally held, thank you for staying. Share this with someone who knows how complicated love can be, who understands that power is a language we must relearn, that apologies are beginnings and not conclusions. Like the video, if you want more grounded, cinematic dramas about ordinary people caught in extraordinary storms, subscribe to join this channel's community of readers who believe characters can change and that change costs something worth paying. And leave a comment. Which moment stayed with you? When have you watched security step in, outside or inside your own life? And what did it teach you? Your stories keep this one breathing.